Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar session. Thank you for joining us. I'm Aditi Bhosle from Borderless Access, and I'm the host and moderator for this session. So just to give you a context, the world of B2B research is constantly evolving. With the advent of technology and social media, we see that information is flowing in much faster, and we have loads of information and data that is coming through that needs to be cleaned and analyzed to get meaningful insights. Access with audience is much easier now than ever before. But engaging this audience with all the digital distractions is getting much more challenging. Number of touch points for customer feedback along the supply chain has increased, but getting through to the core decision maker is still difficult. So with that, we know that the realm of the B2B research is very complex and intriguing. So let's attempt to unveil some of the secrets of engaging with B2B audience for research. So just to get into introductions, let me begin by saying this. The social identity of a professional begins here. This platform houses more than 900 million professionals. Yes, this is none other than LinkedIn. And we have the Senior Director of Market Research at LinkedIn, Roher Verhulst, joining us as an esteemed guest. Welcome, Roher. And I'll just give a short introduction. With over 20 years of work experience, Roher works closely with various internal stakeholders at LinkedIn to understand their business needs and deliver actionable insights and recommendations that inform business decisions, be it towards building products, new features, solutions, optimizing customer retention and engagement, enhancing brand awareness and perceptions, and building powerful go-to-market strategies. He is the co-author of the book, The Business of Marketing Research. In his previous role at Microsoft, he has led many research programs, including one of the biggest global corporate research satisfaction research study. Joining us is Matt Warden, who is the lead of business development for Americas for Borderless Access. An expert in market research and SaaS Insightz platforms with over 20 years of experience, Matt has held several senior positions at Fuel Cycle, Dig Insights, and Alida. He has had strong client relationships along the way with Fortune 500 companies, including Coca-Cola, Mars, Goldman Sachs, Microsoft, and many others. So welcome, Roher and Matt. And just before we start the discussion, for the audience that have joined in, please feel, so the session will be open to questions at the end of the discussion. So please feel free to post in your questions in the Q&A icon that you see below. And I will, share these with the two experts that we have. So diving straight into the discussion with these two gentlemen. Roher, when we were initially planning for this discussion, I remember you clearly calling out your distaste for the term B2B. Can you just let us know what your take is on this particular term?
Yeah, and thanks, first of all, thanks for the really nice introduction, Aditi, and glad to be here and share my thoughts on B2B research and how to engage that audience effectively. Yeah, B2B is sort of a strange term because, I think like many of us, and, we don't wake up in the morning saying like, oh, we're a B2B person or we're a B2C person. So it's not something that people refer to themselves or identify themselves with, right? So when I wake up in the morning, I wake up as like, I'm going to do market research and I'm a market researcher and I work at a tech company, right? So people identify and associate themselves much more with sort of the function and what they do than I think the sort of context in which their company may be playing, right? And so what's interesting about LinkedIn is like we both have a B2C business and we have a B2B business. And many engineers, I don't think would basically associate themselves with either of those terms, right? So basically, yeah, B2B means that These are businesses that basically are catering towards other businesses as opposed to individual consumers, right, for consumers' personal use. But generally, I think what we're trying to get at with market research, the struggles we have is not because it's B2B, but it's because oftentimes people in B2B are sort of specialized in certain functions. Obviously the number of people that cater to B2B is much smaller than, the larger sort of consumer audience, general consumer audience of B2C. And so I think it's better to reframe this discussion, I think, through the lens of hard to reach, engaging, hard to find groups for research, right? So finite audiences that are much harder to find and identify, but also obviously are much more limited in terms of the time they have available to us. And so I think that's probably a healthier way of kind of framing the challenge that we have with this particular audience. And I think another example is like, I think a high net worth individual, a doctor who caters to consumers, they're just as hard to find, right? And sometimes we do want to go after those audiences for our research. And so that B2B versus B2C distinction doesn't make much sense. Now, I think what the industry have been plagued with for a long time, and particularly, audiences in sort of the B2B context, is that, it's been really difficult to get sort of high quality respondents, and because they're so finite. And oftentimes I think what's challenging too is that when you go to panels, oftentimes they screen for who you are, but they don't screen for what you do. Right. And that's really important for B2B because we want to be able to ask questions within the context of what they do rather than, who they are per se. And it's really about who they are and what they do. So yeah, that's a long answer, but hopefully that clarifies a little bit that when I think about this topic, I really much think about this topic through the lens of, audiences that are really difficult to reach and engage that way.
Sure. Thanks, Rohit. Given that you work with, the diverse stakeholders internally, where you work with product teams, marketing, sales, engineering, what are the different types of research requirements that come your way? And what kind of audiences need is there for these research projects that you do?
Yeah, so we're a central market research team. We have about 30 researchers on my team. And we support a large number of businesses. We do all of the research for the company, at the exception of user experience research. That sits more with a dedicated group under product. And we're part of marketing. But the kinds of questions that we try to answer, or the types of research that we do, spans from brand messaging and positioning research to customer satisfaction research or loyalty research to value research to product research and testing new features. We also do quite a bit of kind of market outlook type research. We have a number of research studies that we also publish externally. So the Workforce Confidence Index, for example, where we measure and gauge the confidence that people have in the economic outlook, which we're feeling every 2 weeks, gets widely published and can be accessed through LinkedIn. But we also obviously track a lot of like market outlook, so market dynamics for the markets that we are playing in as sort of business, as line of businesses. We also do quite a bit of thought leadership research. So we have obviously we're in this very enviable position where we have access to, like Aditi was saying, over 900 million professionals, which gives us a great advantage in terms of getting really granular and find people to get answers on. But naturally, we also do a bunch of research that we can do on LinkedIn because oftentimes, particularly when we do competitive research, we want to be blind and anonymous. And so there's also a fair amount of work that we do with, sources outside of LinkedIn. And the book that I published has many examples that are talking about kind of the types of research we do in all of these different areas. If you're interested in seeing the methodologies that we use, you should get a copy of the book. But yeah, as I mentioned, we support a broad range of businesses. So on the one hand, we have kind of talent acquisition and hiring, which is our largest business and really focused on giving recruiters the tools and products that they need to find candidates, whether it's active candidates or passive candidates that are searching for jobs. Obviously, we have also a very strong marketing and advertising business. And then we also cater to sales professionals. We have a number of tools and solutions that people pay for to get sort of advanced access to our network. And then obviously we have our sort of flagship or LinkedIn.com, which many of you know is sort of a free member where you create a profile and you connect and engage with other people in your field or with your coworkers. So we do research in all of those different areas, and that keeps it very interesting as well, because it gives us a lot of diversity and a lot of like interesting, complex topics for us to go tackle. But in the B2B context, we often survey both kind of end users, so end users of products, so the individual recruiters who use our products, but also the decision makers, so the VPs of talent acquisition. And oftentimes there's also a bit of overlap, so end users and decision makers tend to be the same. But you usually want to understand kind of I think, what sort of the companies and the customers think of LinkedIn. And that's kind of like an aggregate of decision maker and end users within the company that are giving us perspective on what they think of LinkedIn.
Thanks, Roher. Quite a lot of work for a 30-member team there. So, you have been in this industry for over 20 years now. How have the research requirements evolved over the period of 2 decades that you have been?
Yeah, I would say there's obviously a lot of things have changed, a lot of things have stayed the same as well, but obviously the speed, the speed by which things are moving around is just getting faster and faster. Our decision makers and our internal stakeholders need results faster. Development cycles have come down quite a bit. So, it used to be that it took us maybe 2 or 3 quarters to launch a feature, and today we can launch a feature within a week. And so, research has to keep up with that and has to be very agile. The other thing that I see less of because of the speed issues, that we see fewer sort of these really large scale surveys that run multiple quarters, right? So, for example, segmentation studies that span multiple quarters and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars are much rarer these days. So I think speed and the cost has come down. Advanced analytics is another area that used to be the domain of a few people within the marketing science group. I think it has become much more accessible. So there's much more software out there where people can, whether it's Sawtooth or SPSS or R, where you can run things much more easily. And it's much easier to pick up the skills needed to do more advanced analytics. Obviously we've been undergoing a massive digital transformation, and it's still underway. Like companies are all, online at this stage. But I think people are also increasingly interacting more online, which leaves a whole trail of data crumbs, if you will, and creates more data. And so obviously big data has been a term that's been used over the years. Millennials are increasingly entering the workforce now as decision makers. So they're moving up in the corporations. They do a lot online. They search for products online. They make decisions online. They connect with others online. And so there's a lot of information you can get, not just from the survey itself, from a primary survey, but there's a lot of data that you're getting just from mining the internet or mining other sources, just like you were saying in introduction at DT. And so that requires researchers to be a little bit more nimble and not just stick with their own kind of tool sets, but also have to now expand and learn how to do data analytics, if you will. So that has changed as far as requirements for research. I think the other thing that's changed is sort of the data collection, right? So the way we do research has changed in some ways, because if you go back to like the 90s, when I first started with market research, it was very unusual to do a web-based survey. I mean, it was just about to start, people start doing web-based surveys. At that time, it was still mostly caddy interviews, right? So computer-assisted telephone interviews. And when the web-based solutions were coming out and more surveys were being programmed for the desktop and ultimately mobile as well, to companies like SurveyMonkey, it became much more of a commodity. And so I think the challenge that the industry was facing at that point is that everyone could do a survey who had access to SurveyMonkey. And so, but the challenge with that is that people, the hard to reach audiences like B2B, were getting suddenly hit up with a lot more research studies and requests. And so response rates have been declining, I think, pretty dramatically over the last 2 decades. And obviously in the, like I just mentioned, the 2010s, right about there, you saw big data sort of taking off. And so that created a whole, I think, slew of new companies that are specialized in social listening, where they're scraping the internet for mining for information around audiences. Obviously, text analytics has taken off in terms of like, how do you sort of analyze unstructured data? And now we're undergoing the next evolution with ChatGPT, right? And so you see a lot of companies now experimenting with, for example, creating synthetic respondents, right? And virtual respondents, because ChatGPT is essentially a massive focus group, if you will, with lots of verbatims and lots of people reviewing all kinds of stuff. And so, that's been an interesting medium to extract insights from. But I think the constant has been throughout, I think, everything is that you have to be really good at asking the right questions. And I think that's key, being able to really identify what the problems are you're trying to solve, and then being really smart about asking the right questions. But yeah, that's sort of the things. I mean, I can talk a little bit more about, like, obviously what we see with research vendors, but I think on the vendor side, we're demanding more of that speed. I think for vendors, it's harder to compete on just raw methodologies, because it's been much more accessible to understand how you do, like, for example, base net or something more advanced. So agencies, I think, are positioning more sort of a specialist and particular thought leaders in particular areas. Obviously because of the speed, you rarely see us creating, hundreds of pages of cost steps or 80 page slide decks. And so we have to get to the core and the key insights really quickly. And so that requires vendors to be really in tune with, I think, what the client is looking for, and create a very sort of personalized relevance experience when they deliver all the insights. So those are some of the things, Aditi. I don't know if there's, if you want to double click in any of these areas, but those are sort of the things that kind of come to mind for me.
Thanks, Roher, and I believe you've pretty much covered everything, but I'll go to Matt and ask him from an agency perspective, how have you seen the requests from end clients evolving, Matt? I hope his internet connection is...
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm having a little bit of trouble here. So I appreciate everyone's patience with my internet. I hope you can hear me. Can you?
Yes,
so,
yes, Matt.
And so, one of the things that I think has become more prevalent is, I think, the ability, I think people think more is possible these days, right? And so they think, I think from an end client perspective, that maybe 10 years ago, they didn't think that perhaps a certain B2B audience could be in a community, could be, reached. And, of course, without some skepticism. And I think now what's happening, and, certainly with our meta community, and I should back up a little bit and just say, certainly I have had experience, building IT decision maker studies, even communities, but also we're talking the other end of the spectrum, which is also CPG decision makers. So we're talking about like decision makers in an office, decision makers in a hospital, those sorts of things. And so, I don't think 10 years ago people thought those things would be possible, but with the right incentive structure and with the correct kind of messaging, I think those things are a little bit more possible now. And, we were doing some prep work, and I think this is a really good point that was brought up, is like, is it going to be the CTO of Apple? Maybe not. But there are so many diverse decision makers out there that are, reachable through a panel or through a community that we can continue to engage. That I think, this is it's certainly, a necessary and worthwhile venture for everybody.
It's all about giving the value for their time, right, Matt? That is what
Yes.
is important. Yes, thank you for that.
Yeah, I
totally agree with that.
think one thing to add to what Matt was saying, I think what obviously has changed also dramatically is that there's a lot more, we have greater abilities to identify someone and what they do, right? Because obviously with LinkedIn, and I'm sure a lot of companies use LinkedIn to verify people's, not just identity, but also what they do. And these tools didn't exist, 20, 30 years ago. So I think but the question is, like, even if we know who they are, we're still struggling to kind of get them to engage. So I think that's still, the harder part. And it's particularly if more, like, the other problem is, like, people are, because we know who they are and who you are, you're getting bombarded with lots of requests. And I think that's the other problem, is people are just getting overwhelmed with requests. And then, getting your one request through is going to be harder and harder.
But I would ask you, I mean, I think just the diverse ways that we're able to ask questions now with the different methodologies, like I think you were alluding to earlier, where we talk about, you know, just somebody giving a verbatim via video and having that translated allows a certain level. I mean, I would be hesitant to say that, 10 years ago, somebody would be like, wanting to fill out, if we were an IT decision maker or somebody, a questionnaire. But if you said, hey, just talk about your life for like 5 minutes on video and have that automatically transcribed, I think that makes a researcher's job easier. How do you feel about that?
No, I mean, I definitely think obviously the ways in which we capture feedback has changed quite dramatically. And I think, I with video and other mechanisms. And so it's easier to just do something off the cuff to video rather than to go into a structured survey, that's 20, 30 questions long. But I think that's great, but I think there still needs to be a mechanism for structuring a conversation in a way that it gets to the questions and the answers that you're looking for as a researcher versus it being completely open-ended. I mean, being completely open-ended is great to some degree, but it's not going to give you potentially, the question and the ability to sort of probe deeper on what you really want to understand and deeper motivations of why people make certain decisions. So, I think it is. I think you're right. In many ways, there are more ways of getting feedback, but you still need to pair that or combine that with some mechanism of structure.
I agree with that. How are you feeling, like, incentivization wise? Like when we're talking about, obviously cash is still king, but as far as feeding back information, like how do you see that balance as far as engaging B2B audiences?
I mean, we obviously built a number of communities at LinkedIn where we sort of carved out or siphoned off a group of people that are within the same function, right? So we have essentially a panel, if you will, an in-house panel for marketing professionals and talent acquisition professionals. And so, but when we pair them, when we bring them together like that, we really make it very clear that they're now part of a community. And so I think they appreciate that. People want to be they want to belong to a group of sort of like-minded people with similar interests. And it's not just about the research in these communities, but it's about being able to share kind of thoughts or be part of forums, if you will, to talk about topics. Obviously, a lot of times they're related to LinkedIn, what LinkedIn is about to launch or products that we're thinking or ideas that we're thinking about. And people enjoy that, and they enjoy to see the interaction among each other. And so that's definitely some value in doing it that way, to get sort of the discussions going. But like I said, I think we're also living in a world where everyone is pressured for time and people are less committed than I think they were maybe 10 years ago. And so you have to find for incentive structures that maybe, like, it's not always cash. I mean, for sure, a lot of people are driven by cash first and foremost, but it's also because they're part of this community, they want to get feedback on what other people were saying, and sort of getting a sort of a report back on what the collective was saying is valuable in some cases, and drives sort of repeat response.
Sure. Rohit? Yeah, Matt.
No, I was just going to say, I'd like to just understand a little bit more about your feelings on like recruitment sources for different research studies and what you find to be valuable. Obviously, you have a great asset right now at your fingertips. Working with LinkedIn, drawing from your previous experience with Microsoft. How do you find the right people? Do you have any insights into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are. I mean, obviously, there's lots of companies that are scraping the internet, and like I said earlier, I think obviously we've become very sophisticated around trying to understand like who you are, what you do. For anyone who sort of engage or participate in the internet, I mean, I'm always amazed at how accurate the targeting of ads are when I opt in. Obviously, now with GDPR, things have changed a little bit. So we're getting a little bit harder again. It used to be easier, and now it's getting a little harder again. But a lot of companies scrape all kinds of information to the degree that you can find contact information. Like if you look like a company like ZoomInfo, they have so much information about so many people. And so companies are starting to use that, and they can do it in bulk. So I think that's how people source, and that's how a lot of companies are sourcing. I think the challenge still is until privacy and the willingness of people to do that, particularly in these sort of more specialized fields. People just don't have the time for it, and then it becomes a little bit of a kind of a money kind of game of like how much incentive do you pay to get them to respond. But the problem I think too is like you may get them once, but then a lot of these people don't do it second time or third time or fourth time. So you have to constantly recruit new people, if you will. No one is sort of committed to like, oh, I'm going to be in this research panel and I'm going to just for the rest of the year, I'm just going to fill out like 2 surveys a week. People don't do that. Not normal people.
I think that's fair. Aditi, I'm sorry, I cut you off last time, so go ahead.
No worries. So I was just referring to a point that you made earlier, Rohit, about having a finite set of audiences, and the higher you go up in the organization, the more difficult it is to get responses from the core decision maker. So I just wanted to check if there is any case that you can talk about. Can you tell us a story of how you succeeded in fulfilling a research requirement of this kind, where getting to the decision maker was really very difficult?
Yeah, so in 2014, I think probably 2014, 2015, we acquired lynda.com, which was at that time the largest sort of online learning site, because we wanted to get into the online learning space. And LinkedIn, obviously acquired Lynda because they had a really rich library of courses, online courses at that time. But I also kind of create a whole new sort of audience for us around decision makers for learning solutions, right? A lot of companies, big corporations oftentimes have a talent management or a talent development group that sort of makes decisions about what kinds of corporate software or learning software they're using. And we didn't really have a real sort of presence or awareness in their market or mind share in their market. And so, the teams came to us and wanted to just kind of understand how much mind share people in talent management corporations would have at LinkedIn. And we filled the survey, and obviously we were very familiar with sort of some of the other audiences that we traditionally have gone after, but not this particular audience. And so we started with just a general, panel and consumer panel. And, I quickly discovered that when we started filling the survey that there was just a lot of garbage getting in. A lot of people were sort of faking. And so we had a couple of red herring questions. We had a little bit of we had the verbatims, obviously, and they were very telling. And so it was, we had to throw away about 80% of the sample that came in. And that posed a problem for us because, what was left over just wasn't enough to say anything robust about. We went back to the executive team and they insisted that it had to be decision makers. But, and this goes back to the points we were making earlier, we tried to educate them a little bit that, with some of the qualitative research we were doing, we're actually finding that the learners or corporate learners actually had quite a bit of influence too on what kinds of software or what kinds of platforms they would want to use. And so we sort of educated the organization a little bit on, you can sort of expand the group of people to go beyond sort of the final decision maker. And a lot of people have some influence in some way. And we show that through some of the data. Like I think we showed that at least upwards of 50% of the people within that particular function had some level of influence over decisions. And so when we show that data, the executive team became a little bit more receptive to sort of relaxing the criteria around that and going a little bit broader. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is that, in B2B context, oftentimes it's usually a buying committee. Like it's usually a committee of people that make decisions for the company. And everyone has sort of a particular influence on it. And so with learning, for example, we discovered quickly that there's an IT group that has some influence over. There's the learning team, the talent development team that has some influence over. And then the learners themselves, the people that are learning and taking courses within the corporation have influence. And so it's more about trying to get the right kind of mix of people rather than getting that one single individual that's extremely difficult to get, who's the most senior, CHRO or talent development leader. And so once we went back to them and we relaxed the criteria, we were able to fill the sort of the number of people that we needed to get a robust read on like the mind share that LinkedIn at that time had. But it was a very kind of costly exercise, and it took quite a bit of iterating before we got there. And then, we sort of also followed up with kind of a qualitative study to, so we kind of did quant-qual, where we then followed up with certain individuals to sort of double verify that they were really the people that had some influence and were important for us as we grew that business to influence and grow mindshare with. And so at that point, we sort of ended up being a successful place, and we're able to come back with that data. But yeah, it was not an easy exercise, but I think there's some key learnings here. Like when we think about B2B audiences, or we think about sort of hard to reach audiences, oftentimes you can expand and relax the criteria a little bit and go a little bit wider and broader to get to the right insights.
Sure. And was there a time where you were unable to get an audience? I know that, you did manage to relax the criteria and manage to, complete this project, which seemed difficult. But was there ever a time where you didn't have this kind of option and, you were unable to conduct primary research to get the required information for your team?
Yeah, in the early days of LinkedIn, we actually tried to go into the B2B sampling business and make the LinkedIn network available for research companies. And so we obviously got a lot of success in the early days because there were not like great other alternatives at the time. But I remember one request from a technology company that was asking for RFI engineers, and a very specialized sort of engineering group that we had some presence on LinkedIn at the time, but it was a little bit of a crapshoot, if you will, in terms of like whether we were able to get a meaningful sample of 100 or so. And so we started fielding it, and then we discovered quickly that we couldn't get more than 30 completes because there were a couple of challenges with that. One is like the survey was like really long, it was like 20 minutes. But also, and then the client didn't want to budge on going with a shorter survey. And it just wasn't, we ended up that there, like the other thing is like through the screening, we also experienced like a lot of like people were terminating particular questions. And again, the client wasn't able to relax those. And so we ended up doing it on a best effort basis, but I think we got stuck on like 30 completes or so. And, I think that was for us kind of a good learning experience. But I think the thing with B2B is that you have to be a little bit flexible around like how you set the termination points. And I think oftentimes companies are looking for sort of what I call the purple squirrel and don't have a clear sort of grasp of like how large is the size of that sort of group, and sort of have that feasibility and done that desk research up front to understand like how big is this population in the wild, and like when I layer on all these additional screening criteria, what am I ultimately left with? Is if it's just too small, you're splitting hairs, and you can't really do quantitative research at that point.
So thank you, Roher. Matt, so I agree with Roher on the challenges of access, of some of these audience. Do you have any examples of engaging some hard to get audience for your end clients successfully?
Well, I think one of the big things when we think about this is, listen, Borderless Access has great access to, a lot of B2B decision makers, and I think that's a good place to start. But also, for a lot of these companies, we also one of the things that I always found in my if all else is exhausted is connecting with it could be a some sort of industry list where these people are also invested, and so just reaching out to those different types of contacts and just being resourceful, I think it is a huge thing. I will always tell the story of working with Georgia Pacific Pro, where they were looking for decision makers about paper, whether it be at hospitals or offices or also I was thinking the other, also kind of like hospitality type places, and just going to diverse resources to try and recruit that. It's a tough thing to try and find like an audience like that. And so I, always say, like, when you're doing one of these, you want to talk to the real people, and if you can find a way to verify that they are the real people, that's where you want to be. And you have to be resourceful about it. And so, I think in any of these type B2B, whether it be a community or just a one-off study, I think that the main thing that we're all concerned about is, the data integrity and making sure that these are the people that we want to talk to. And so, any way we can go about that is going to be a good thing.
So thank you, Matt. Rohit, coming to the designing of the research, can you throw some light on some of the best practices for designing surveys and questionnaires, the way that we can engage with the B2B audiences and get the best of information from them?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things, right? I mean, we talked about survey length. Like, I think that to me is a really big one. Like, I see still too many surveys that exceeding like 10 minutes. And I think, in this day and age, people don't have the attention span to sit and click through a 10-minute survey. So I would always encourage my team to get it down to no more than 5 minutes at most, 5 or 7 minutes. I'd rather do, for example, 2 surveys that are 5 or 7 minutes than one survey that's 13 or 15 minutes. So I think that's really important. Rather than sort of thinking, I only have that one chance, so I'm just going to ask and cram everything in there, and really make sure you're really clear on like what you're trying to get out of the interview and the survey. And so we stay clear to your research, stay close to your research objectives. Because I see too many surveys still kind of like, yeah, we'll add in all these nice to haves, but they're not the must have, right? And so I think that's really important. Make sure it's kind of in a conversational style, more written from the point of view that it's written by some of them, like them, so like-minded. So if you're reaching out to, for example, people in recruiting or talent acquisition, that make them feel like that survey actually speaks intelligently about topics that they care about and it's relevant to them. I think a lot of the B2B audiences are very they tend to be specialists in a particular field. So I think when you kind of stroke their ego a little bit around being the thought leaders or being the leaders in their industry, I think always helps kind of encourage them to participate. I think this is less about sort of design of the survey questionnaire, but more around like the process and the operations around it. We talked a little about like setting up communities and creating communities of like-minded professionals. And so we've done that at LinkedIn very successfully. And so, yeah, I think now with ChatGPT, we also have this luxury, I think, for people, even if you're on the vendor side, you don't have a great sort of affinity with a particular audience. ChatGPT will also oftentimes give you great suggestions on how you maybe should frame certain things, the answer categories you should think about. And so I hope that everyone is sort of using it as an assistant in crafting more thoughtful surveys and questionnaires. And you can even ask ChatGPT to sort of formulate the questions in a certain style that is consistent with the style of the audience that's filling out the survey. So those are some things that come to mind, but happy to go deeper in any of those areas.
Just a follow-up on that question. What are the things that you look for to ensure that you have faith in the data? So when it comes to checking of the data, what all are the things that you look out for?
Yeah, I think obviously we always look for like speedsters and straight lining and all those kinds of things. We tend to put in a get hiring question as well, and we do this mostly particularly when we do external research or with other panels, to test their knowledge of the space, but also it gets harder not to ChatGPT. But ultimately, I think, what's been the best sort of source for verification is just the verbatims. Like if you ask an open-ended question, like a follow-up question on some question, you can quickly see who's sort of taking it or making a bogus answers. And that gives me like a lot of pause, because it's like, yeah, you may have been the right person, but you clearly didn't pay a lot of attention, or you clearly were rushed and not interested really in filling out the survey. So we'll delete you, or it shows that in verbatim, you just don't know what they're talking about. right? And so I think that's always been a great area for us to look and check the quality.
Thanks, Rohir. That was really very helpful. So, Matt, one question for you. What are some of the innovative techniques or approaches for engaging B2B audiences that have emerged in recent years? Matt, you're on mute. You are on mute, Matt.
Sorry, I was trying so hard the whole conversation that now my audio is not doing well. So I would think the main thing is really around being direct. And I think we spoke about this earlier, and that is we only have these people for a set amount of time, and you want to get right to the heart of the matter. And so any way, and I was speaking about like video translation and these things earlier, really about just allowing people to give their feedback as soon as possible, rather than going through what might be an exhaustive 20-point some sort of qualification survey, or just making sure that people are who they say they are. If we can get ahead of that, right, and we can ensure that these people are who they are ahead of time and allow them to give their feedback quicker, I think that's really where people are going to be successful in doing B2B market research.
Sure. Thank you, Matt. Thanks for that. So there is one question that I would ask both of you. Are there any emerging trends or future predictions regarding engaging B2B audiences in market research that we should be aware of? In fact, there is a question from one of the attendees on similar lines. How would research landscape shape 10 years down the line for agency-based businesses? So you could
I can take a stab at that. So obviously I talked about ChatGPT, and I think that's really interesting. I'm actually spending a lot of time trying to wrap my head around how we can use this in the market research world, and what are the different use cases we can develop. And we're working with a company called Quantum on this. Really great company with a lot of like great thought leaders and very innovative. So Quantum is, we're sort of experimenting with this notion of creating sort of virtual and synthetic respondents, right? So where you basically create a prompt and you run it like 1,000 times. You ask, if you had a choice between Indeed or LinkedIn, who would you select? And essentially you can ask some additional context, as well around like, imagine you are a student, imagine you are, a decision maker in a company, and so et cetera, et cetera. And so you can start to see how well ChatGPT is able to generate essentially what you would expect from a real respondent. And some of the early data we're getting is pretty encouraging as far as like replicating demand curves, and it's not bogus what ChatGPT is creating. And so I think we're still in the early innings of it, but I think that's really exciting. I think obviously there are use cases with ChatGPT where it becomes kind of assistant to the researcher, right, in terms of the ability to read tables and read data, and the ability to then generate reports and insights. And so I think we'll see, a great improvement in sort of the productivity and the speed at which we can turn insights around. But also, and we mentioned this earlier, obviously as an assistant to writing questionnaires and writing hopefully more thoughtful questionnaires and more intelligent questionnaires, because ChatGPT has sort of the knowledge of a particular area, and you can extract that out of the GPT. So I think those are all very exciting, I think, developments, and I think that's gonna, define and revolutionize, market research over the next 10 years. But particularly in the B2B space, where it's really hard to get that audience engaged, or people that are specialized are hard to find. I'd imagine that with ChatGPT, we may be able to tap into some of those respondents over time. And again, we're working on this with Quantum, great company, very sort of innovative and really, I think, taking a really great sort of first step in this area.
Sure. Matt, any thoughts from your side?
I personally used, I love that we're touching on Chat GPT, because I feel like every discussion needs to touch on that these days. One of the things I think is a little bit of a danger for market research is, the marketing professional going out and saying, Chat GPT, build me a marketing plan around a certain thing. And so we might be in danger of getting a sameness of all the answers, because those are what the answers were in the past. And the real discovery in market research is, talking to people and figuring out where they are. So do I think there's an added benefit for, like, listen, I started out like coding verbatims, in one of my first jobs at Harris Interactive way back in the day. And do I want to do that again? Does anyone want to do that again? Absolutely not. But, I think, so there is a ton of benefit with Chat GPT. I think there's still, I caution that we should not get away from talking to real people. How's that?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that, Matt. I think obviously, the way in which you can get access to people's feelings and emotions around particular topics, I think people express a lot of things on the internet and reviews and all that, but I think there's a lot of that's, what's beneath the sort of tip of the iceberg, right? I think that's still very difficult to do. I think ChatGPT, and there's a big question mark around too. It's like, I think what ultimately is the truth out there. So, but yeah, I mean, I think obviously it's clear that ChatGPT is definitely going to have a massive impact on productivity. Just like you said, around verbatim coding, it's one area where ChatGPT is really good at. It's really good at summarizing verbatims or text. So
totally great.
Thank you. I think we'll open this forum for questions. There have been a few questions that have come in. So there is one question from Tapabrata. So today the difference between a consumer and customer is blurring. If I'm a LinkedIn user as an individual, and I'm also a sales navigator user as a business professional, or someone is a buyer of Surface PC or IT Pro in an organization, do you think the traditional ways of segregation of the two makes sense moving forward when surveying them? Would you think creating more integrated surveys that include both audiences on the two sides of the same audience will be more relevant?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely, I mean, like I talked earlier, like I think the LinkedIn Learning example or the Linda example, like where you, on the one hand, we discover very quickly that actually the IT group has a big impact on kind of what software platforms a company, purchases, in addition to the HR department or the learning department, right? And so I think similarly for that example that you bring up, I think it is good to get perspectives on both to get the most robust, well-rounded perspective of how successful you are as a product. Like it's not just the salesperson saying in an organization, oh, I lost Sales Navigator, I want it, but also like if it ends up being really difficult to integrate with your CRM and other tools, that really comes from the IT professionals or the IT group, right? And so I think the more you sort of capture all of these different sentiments, the better. And you can do that in a smart way in a survey. I mean, I think you still want to create maybe some overlap in the survey in certain areas, but have branches and branch out in different areas depending on who you are as an individual. But that goes back to the survey design as well. Make sure that the survey questions are very relevant to the audience that you're trying to get understanding from. You're asking the right questions to the right people. And I think that skill set is still extremely valuable.
So thank you, Rohit. Matt, maybe you can answer this, and we've covered it over the course of discussion, but there is a question from Thea Reddy. What is the best way to recruit target affluent respondents, especially those who occupy high-level occupations, such as executives and senior managers?
Oh, wow. I think that's a very loaded question. I think at the end of the day, it's really going to depend on who the audience is. I think bucketing people into senior managers or anything like that. I think, I think it's a customized approach based on whoever the audience is. I would be, I think, remiss to say there's one blanket way to do it. If you're recruiting, plumbing decision makers, I hate to use that example, like you go about it a different way than IT decision makers. So, I think the best way to think about it is to be as resourceful as you can and think about, put yourself in that person's seat, right? And say, what would I do, or what would I react to? And I think that's the best way that anyone can go about it. And I of course I'm gonna say Borderless Access is a great source for B2B decision makers, but every B2B decision maker is different. And so as we're, I think we let off this saying it's more about decision makers, more than just being B2B. And we are a great resource for that, but also there's multiple, you need to be as resourceful as possible.
Thank you, Matt. There is one question from Pavan Maitri. What are decision-making factors to outsource research requirements in products and service-based firms?
Could you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. What are the decision-making factors to outsource research requirements in products and service-based firms?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think my internet connection's bad. I didn't get that.
Yeah. I mean, I can chime in. The question is a little bit vague, but I don't think we would outsource the requirements of the research per se. But obviously we don't do all the research in house. I think the research that we do outside of LinkedIn tends to be research either because we want to do a blind survey, so we don't want to announce that it's coming from LinkedIn. But I also think there's certain expertise that like I mentioned, ChatGPT and those companies sort of developing really sophisticated ways of going about prompting that we would outsource. So we would outsource particular capabilities that we just haven't, that are so sophisticated and so advanced that we just don't have the bandwidth to do that in-house. I think increasingly, what gets outsourced quite a bit too, especially is in this environment where budgets are getting cut, is I really want to kind of up-level the research team and the corporate researchers to be more like strategic thought leaders, focus more on the story and the impact and the recommendations, and increasingly use kind of contractors or outside vendors to help with sort of the execution and more mundane of putting together the PowerPoints, putting together the the analysis, etc. So I think that's definitely a little bit of a trend there, and it's been going on for a long time. But I think that's now getting more amplified because of the environment we're in, right? And with all the cost cutting happening. So I think those are some examples of where we're outsourcing particular research. But I don't think the requirements are still something that we would define and dictate.
Thank you, Rohit. And I think one question that is very common post-COVID now. What has been the impact of COVID? Any differences you've seen in the way in behavior of the B2B audience, or the way that we need to engage B2B audiences post-COVID?
I mean, in many ways, it's kind of post-COVID is kind of harder now, because I think during COVID we definitely saw a time when it was easier to get people to respond to surveys because everyone just sitting at home being bored. We couldn't go out, couldn't go anywhere, so it's easier to fill out a survey. But coming back, people have been traveling and getting out and doing stuff again, so it's actually been harder again. But yeah, I mean, I think obviously, because most people are more sort of in this hybrid world now, where they come in a few days in the office and then the rest of the time they work from home, I think they optimize their time a little bit better. So you could argue that they should be better about getting the time and mind share for doing a survey. But yeah, at the same time, there's also this ferocious sort of bombardment of like all kinds of companies asking all kinds of questions all the time, and I think that sort of is the force that's going against it, and it just gets worse and worse every year. So.
one last question, Roher. Do you, given that, you have these high-level executives and critical decision makers, do you share information from your studies back with the audience that you interview?
Yeah, no, we do that. When we do for our own internal Insightz communities, we've created, we've communities that range from 10,000 professionals in a particular function like advertising to 60,000 professionals in some other instances, and we always kind of, there's two reasons why. There's two premises we sort of recruit people into. That one is, if you join our sort of internal panel, you get, we'll ask you about features that we're about to launch or like ideas that we have about new things we can do with LinkedIn, and so you get a pretty engaged audience. And oftentimes we will share back sort of like what people thought about a particular idea or concept, and so people appreciate that. They appreciate getting an abstract of the insights. But again, I don't know that that's the main motivator for most people. I think when you get to the really senior decision makers, it's ultimately just like hard cash or charitable donations happen. They're helpful as well, but it's tricky. What you're competing with is time and mind share for like all the things I could be doing at a time.
I believe we have answered all the questions that came in from audience. Since there are no more questions, maybe we can call it a day. Any closing statements from you, Roher and Matt?
No, I would just say thanks for your time. Obviously, even the people, thank you for your time for everyone who's joined the conversation. I hope you found it, beneficial, but because we're all taking time out of our busy days. And so, I appreciated this conversation. I think it's a meaningful conversation that we, of course, needs to be had and heard. And, I think what I love about this is I learned something. So I think that's a great thing.
No, I really enjoyed being on this panel today, and definitely while sharing my thoughts around this. It's a challenging topic, but I think it's a great topic to talk about. And I think that all of us researchers, we're in a very enviable position, I think, because there's no shortage of questions, there's no shortage of things that we can answer and tackle, and the problems get more complex. And it's fun to be in this sort of space, and I enjoy learning about people and how they think and the psychology behind them, like how that translates into consumer behavior and customer behavior. And so, it keeps it for the people that are curious and creative. I think it's a great field to be in. So.
Yes, Roher, and I'm sure we will have a lot of follow-up questions since we have recorded the session. And for people who couldn't attend now, we will be sharing the recording. So there will be quite a few follow-up questions that I anticipate, and maybe I will share those with you. And I hope to, get your feedback and responses that will help, answer those questions. So thank you so much for your time, Roher. It was great having you on board. Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. It was a great session. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.